everyone, and welcome to the brand new and exponentially growing comic book vault. I'm Captain Logan.
And I'm Dan.
And Dan, today we're going to talk about Alpha, the 3-issue Amazing Spider-Man arc that runs from Amazing 692 through, what, 694?
Yes, because the Hobgoblin Danger Zone thing starts at 695. So.
Yes. Cool. So, yeah, we're backtracking from some old Amazing leading up to Superior Spider-Man, and we're going to review everything that leads up to Superior over a few videos. So, starting with Alpha, and here we go. Dan, from the very outset of this, from this anniversary issue, what did you think of the idea of giving Spider-Man a sidekick?
I don't think that's a concept that I necessarily needed to see, but it's something that hasn't been done with him before. I got to give Slott credit for that, coming up with a concept that's never been done with a character before. I think that's something that could have been taken in an interesting direction, but I personally just didn't think the execution was all there.
I don't think it is either. First of all, I just don't like Alpha as a character, and we'll have to explore that. Unfortunately, he's just kind of typical, sort of what you would expect, and then when you get to the end of it, the way it ends is sort of what you would expect. I wasn't real impressed with him as a character, or really with where Slott chose to take him. But my biggest problem with it is I think that this as a concept is something that needed to last longer. And I hate to say that because I'm saying that about a character I don't like, but the idea of Spider-Man having a sidekick, they made a big deal out of this.
Yeah, they did, and it only lasted 3 issues.
It's 3 issues. It's a small arc. This is not Spider Island, or even the length of Ends of the Earth, you know? I mean, it had they had a vague Marvel teaser for this.
Yeah, and I mean, who knows, maybe he'll come back in Superior. They do leave it open at the end for him to somewhat return.
That's true.
Is kind of strange because he says that his powers go away, but then we see him like crush a locker at the end. I wasn't really clear as to how the powers worked in that scene, and even in the entire book. Were you sort of confused about how Alpha's powers were working too?
I felt like it was a bit oversimplified. I think it's an interesting idea. Just conceptually, it's not something I've necessarily seen before. And again, I'll give Slott credit for the initial concept of a character whose powers grow with the expansion of the universe. That's very comic book, and it's very science fiction, and it makes a certain kind of sense because, of course, the universe is always expanding. So if you had a molecule that was somehow connected to that phenomenon, I don't know if it makes any kind of actual logical sense, but it's not a bad idea.
Yeah, I don't think it really needs to make any kind of logical sense either, given the nature of some of the science that was used in the early Marvel stuff by Stan Lee and his collaborators anyway.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not giving Slott any crap at all for coming up with that idea. That's not anything stranger than bad luck powers, Dan. I'm totally fine with it.
What I was just sort of confused with was how there's just some points where they say that Alpha can do some things with his powers, like they say he can only use one of his selected powers at a time, and then all of a sudden when the script needed it to, he's able to, and they don't really explain how or why.
Yeah,
I just wasn't sure what the sort of limits and stuff of this kid's powers were. Maybe it's odd that we're concentrating on just the powers, but that was just something that sort of threw me for a loop. Was I just wasn't sure exactly how powerful this guy was, because they said he was more powerful than the Phoenix.
Or that he was on that same level at the very least.
Reed Richards said that Omega was Phoenix level and Alpha was above them.
Whoa,
so
really? Okay.
He was saying that he's more powerful than Phoenix.
Because the line I remember is somebody mentions, I forget who it is, that he's... Oh, I know, it was Spider-Man with the whole Jackal cloning plot, where Spider-Man's like, it's like if you cloned Molecule Man or the Phoenix.
Yeah.
And he listed another character or two in there, too. I do think that it fits... Talking about his powers, though, is important because it fits in with his character and with interesting potentials for places to go with them that Slott just didn't take. Some missed opportunities. The way understood the whole he can only use one power at a time thing is that he doesn't understand how his powers work. And so I think it's mentioned that, like, he doesn't get that he can use his powers more than one at a time, and that's why he doesn't. You're right that just all at once when the script needs him to, he's suddenly using more than one power, and that is definitely problematic. It would have been nice if we'd had a moment where he figured that out. And one of the problems I have with the character is that he's just a dumb kid with powers. That's all he is.
Yeah, and I think what Slott was trying to say here was, because he did go back to origin quite a bit here, talking about how Peter Parker's upbringing is sort of the thing responsible for him being the man that he is today. And it was sort of juxtaposing him with a kid who didn't have that upbringing at all and had a completely opposite thing, and was saying that, you know, even with this vast amount of power, he's not able to be as good of a hero as Spider-Man because he's just not built for it as a human being. He's just not, he doesn't have that in him, he didn't have the upbringing and all that stuff, and that's what makes Spider-Man special, which I think is it's a noble endeavor. But I don't really buy it here because Peter is acting irresponsible pretty much the whole time. I felt like the Spider-Man in here read to me like he didn't really care about what he was doing with Alpha in how he goes about teaching him and how he resolves the problem. It's really telling to me of how lazy Peter is here when he sends Alpha out into the world without a secret identity, something that he always harps on and has been trying to safeguard his entire life. And then once he is in danger of being kidnapped, Spider-Man's like, oh yeah, I probably should have done that. Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was really problematic for me, too, and really kind of came off as kind of silly. Spider-Man, sometimes when Slott writes him, he seems to have a difficult time understanding the difference between the concepts of being irresponsible and being clueless.
Yeah.
Because what he did here wasn't, I'm not sure I agree with you, it wasn't so much irresponsible as just he wasn't using his head. He wasn't thinking. Yeah, dude, give him a mask, put him in a costume. But the thing is, he would have put him in a costume. I don't buy that he would have been that short-sighted to have not have come up with that. Why didn't he think of that? It's very strange. There is the whole bit, of course, that he is seen with powers immediately at that science exhibition. And so people know that he has powers, but once again, if he goes out and uses powers and the fact that he has different ones, he could put on a costume and pretty easily nobody would know who he was. So,
right, for sure.
Yeah, that was really silly.
The thing about responsibility, too, that I was saying, and him being irresponsible with the teaching, I sort of meant that I just assumed that Peter would think of that just because that's in his character, so I assumed he was being lazy. But there's also another point where Alpha sort of messes up that monster that the FF and Spider-Man are fighting, and he flies off the handle, and the FF are like, all right, Peter, your responsibility just flew off. It's the most powerful being in the universe. Go after him. And he's like, oh, can't I just go help fight this monster that went underground? And I was like, come on, really?
Yeah, that was really goofy.
And I also, because the Avengers and the FF are so integral to this story, they're in here quite a bit, I really didn't buy that they would... the first person they would give this big threat to the fabric of our entire reality, they would put it in the hands of Spider-Man just because his experiment created him. Like, after Spider-Man demonstrated that he was failing, I feel like there's a scene in here where Reed Richards is like, oh, Spider-Man's not doing a good job, but I hope he does it eventually.
Yeah, it's like
we're all gonna die.
It's that old cliche classic science fiction thing of, you're our only hope.
Yeah.
Just because your name's in the title. I mean, that's how I felt about it too. And you're right. It really is Alpha's really only given to him because he created him, so it's his, air quotes, responsibility. Yes, Spider-Man stories are about responsibility, but only to the point where that logically fits into the story. The Fantastic Four, both them and the Avengers, like you said, they have a responsibility to this guy too, just as a new superpowered creature with all of these powers. You know who the dumbest character is in this whole 3-issue mini or series? This whole arc, the dumbest character is Captain America.
Yeah, I really didn't care for the way he was written in here.
Well, he's not really written. He gets 2 lines of dialogue, and all he says is, hey, go get Alpha. There's this big, giant threat that just suddenly came up out of nowhere that's just in the story so that Alpha would be necessary to the Avengers to fight something, and then he shows up, and he's obviously unstable mentally and not a guy that should be doing this, and is a bigger threat to the Avengers now than the threat they're fighting, right? I forget who it is that they're fighting. Then Captain America's like, get this kid out of here, and I'm like, dude, why did you bring him into the first place? Like...
Yeah, that's what I thought. I didn't think Captain America would immediately trust a kid like that, especially if he had seen all the stuff on the news. The one other thing that I wanted to mention about Peter acting irresponsibly was sort of how he resolved the situation at the end of the arc, where instead of taking responsibility for the thing that he created, he just takes the kid's powers away, and then he's like, all right, now that everyone in the world knows that you're a superhero, I'm going to make you defenseless and throw you back out into the world with no guidance.
I felt like, I really felt like Dan Slott was kind of, for some reason, needing an easy out at the end, because, and this has happened in several of these arcs, and I mean, I feel really bad about it, because like we've said a bunch of times with reviewing these arcs, there's a lot of these start with a good issue, with a good first issue. This one I don't think is that great anyway. I think the problem is I just don't care for the Alpha idea in the first place, but or for the character at least. But anyway, like a lot of these will start with a pretty good premise or a pretty good first issue, and then sort of degenerate. Where even in the middle, Dan Slott will set himself up with a pretty logical direction to go for how Spider-Man's going to solve the problem, and then he ends up taking a loophole at the end instead. And that's what we have here, where he says, you know, in the middle of this, Alpha is his responsibility. He's got to be his Uncle Ben. Mm-hmm. You know, he comes out and says, and I loved that. He comes out and says, I've got to figure out, you know, I've been approaching this all wrong, and he has, and I like that he figures that out. He's like, I've been approaching this all wrong. I've got to be his Uncle Ben, and then it's got to be resolved in one more issue. So, at the first sign that Alpha is not going to pay any attention to him, at the first sign that he's just ignoring his teaching, where you know, Spider-Man walks up to him, he's like, oh, maybe this time he's caught on, and he's listening to these wise things I have to say, and Alpha just walks past him and ignores him and says, I'm not talking to you. That's the moment that he right away goes, fine, forget all that responsibility stuff, me becoming his Uncle Ben. Alpha no more.
Yeah, it's terrible.
It's unfortunate, because like I said, I like where it is in the middle, and then it takes this good idea and degenerates it into something not only not interesting, but kind of shafting Spider-Man's character a bit.
Yeah, I agree. And there's a lot of interesting stuff going on with Alpha just as a concept, too, like how scientists always are looking to create good, and then accidents happen, and sometimes their creations get weaponized. That could have happened with Alpha, because Peter Parker essentially created the most powerful being in the Marvel Universe. The sort of ethics of messing with natural law, the stuff he could have played with there, that I feel like was a missed opportunity. And I feel like the real problem with Alpha here is, you said that he's not really a likable character, and I agree with you. I don't think there's any scenes in here where he's not doing anything completely that isn't completely selfish, except for the opening parts where we show he's sort of establishing that he's a social outcast. I think the real problem is we don't really get any insight into this guy's thoughts and who he is, really. We're told that he's sort of this guy nobody ever notices at school, and I kind of feel like that's all that his character was. I feel like if we had at least gotten into his head a little bit, we could have seen how this sort of fame thing is affecting him, and maybe he's having second thoughts about living this lifestyle. You know, that would have made him a little bit more sympathetic, but we don't really know how he's dealing with all of this stuff.
No, he seems very two-dimensional, where he's just loving the fame, he eats it all up, and then he's supposed to be sympathetic at the end when he loses all that power and has to go back to school. But he's not, because he's generic. Dan, he's a standard crypto freak, man.
No, for sure, yeah.
And I mean, I hate that. He didn't have to be that. I could have been sold on this idea.
Yeah, same. Like
I also think the idea
of concept that we've never seen before. It's unique. It could have been cool, but
and I think the idea of Spider-Man gets a sidekick is something you do for a while. You know, I just maybe I'm projecting my expectations on it based on how much Marvel was pushing this on us. But and then it was only 3 issues, so that was weird. But even still, like I wouldn't want Spider-Man to have a sidekick for a long time. But wouldn't it be interesting to do this for maybe 8, 12, 14 issues or more, and have him for a while having a sidekick as a standard thing, and really explore this and stuff. I wonder if maybe that wasn't the plan, and Marvel now changed things.
Yeah, maybe. Because you would think giving Peter a sidekick would be an interesting place to take the character, because he's been a school teacher before. He has experience teaching kids with, rudimentary skills that they learn in high school. He's the teenage superhero. He can relate to all the things that are going on in a teenager's life. He'd be able to... I feel like he'd be a pretty good superhero teacher if you gave him the opportunity and he sort of learned how to do it.
Spider-Man's also often kind of compared to Batman as being kind of like the anti-Batman.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like give Spider-Man a sidekick and see how his personality with training a sidekick would be very different from how Batman does it, and do some parallels. I mean, that's what I would do with something like that.
For sure, yeah.
But also, I think that part of the missed opportunity is not Slott's fault, in that the period where I would want to see Spider-Man get a sidekick, if he was going to, would be when he was older and married.
Yeah, I would too.
I think 28 to 35-year-old Peter Parker is when you give him a sidekick.
Yeah, I agree.
He's been de-aged, as we all know, since One More Day. And 21-year-old Peter Parker, this particular Peter Parker, who seems every week to just constantly be berating himself for some big screw-up he made that's kind of an easy thing to have not done in the first place, is not the guy I want to see have a sidekick. Right, yeah. I agree. I'm sorry for being so harsh on this. I just don't have a lot of real positive to say about it, unfortunately. Yeah, like we said, the only real positive I have to say, too, is the concept, which, I don't know, I can't really say any things that I really liked about the art too much either, because I'm not a big Ramos fan, but, yeah. Do you have anything else to add? I don't really have anything else written down here that I have to say about it. It's just, I didn't really enjoy it too much. Everything just felt like a contrivance to me. It just felt like the script was getting people into places because it was a written script. It didn't feel organic to me at all. I don't know. The strings on the Puppet Master look very obvious to me. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I think this, and this is just a guess, I don't know this, I think this was supposed to be more issues. I think that Dan Slott was asked to set something big up for Marvel Now, and that he had other plans, and that he needed the other couple things that he's doing before Superior to happen, so he had to cut this off. That's what I think happened. I think he had a place that he was going with the Hobgoblin thing, and we'll talk about that when we do that video. That arc does seem a bit superfluous overall, but I think that he was trying to build Hobgoblin to a place that maybe he couldn't do that particular story after Superior with Doc Ock, so he needed to throw those 3 issues in there real fast. That's what it feels like to me. Yeah, and it's pretty indicative that this pretty indicative of how Marvel published this, not even just marketed it like we were talking about before. It was sort of supposed to be a big thing, like you were saying. It started in the 50th anniversary issue of Amazing Spider-Man. That's a big thing, right? Yeah. I don't know. Maybe you're right. Because I definitely got the condensed feel with the Hobgoblin arc. I feel like that should have been much longer than it ended up being, but we'll get there when we talk about it. Well, everybody, thanks as always for watching the Comic Vault, and thanks for being with me talking about more Spider-Man, Dan. Yeah, no problem. Oh, before we go, should we
people know about the code thing that we're doing, just so they're not confused, because you had said you were dropping Amazing before, right?
Yeah, well, what we're doing is Dan and I are sharing codes for books that we don't happen to be buying, because we've had these codes and all these books just laying around. We're not using them, so so what we do, and this is a thing that you can maybe do with some of your friends that read comics. You know, with a lot of these $3.99 books, Marvel gives you a digital code, and if you're not using it, you can very easily just send it to a friend to read. And of course, there's nothing wrong with doing that. You own it, you purchased it. So so what we do is Dan and I send codes to each other back and forth of the books that we don't happen to read, and or that we don't happen to collect. And so anyway, that's how I'm going back and rereading some of this stuff. I have a little bit of it, but some of it I don't. So Dan sent me the codes. So anyway, yeah, that's how we're doing that. Well, thanks again for watching, everybody, and if there's anything you'd ever like to send me or Vince to review on the Vault, you can always send that to our P.O. Box, Geekvolution, P.O. Box 14183, Lenexa, Kansas 66285. I'm Captain Logan.
And I'm Dan.
And happy reading.